Okay, welcome to our panel. I love a panel. I think first up, we should have our esteemed panelists introduce themselves. So Liz, if you want to go first.
I'll start. Okay, so my name's Liz Rice. I am Chief Open Source Officer at Isovalent, which is the company that originally created the Cilium project. So you may have come across that for particularly Kubernetes networking and eBPF. I'm also pretty involved in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, so I'm on the board there. I used to be on the Technical Oversight Committee, which gave me a very interesting perspective across Cloud Native, and I'm on the board of Open UK. Ooh, how's that? Cover everything?
I think so. Meri?
I'm Meri Williams. I'm the CTO. I am nowhere near as involved in all of the actual underlying things as Liz. I'm coming more from the kind of consumer CTO side. And I also chair the lead platform.
My name's Hannah Foxwell. I am a product director at Sneak. So we focus on security tooling for developers. I'm also involved in Open UK as an ambassador, and I organise DevOps Days London.
Okay, I'm Jen Riggins. I'm your host. I'm a tech journalist. And JK Riggins on whatever socials there are now. There's so many, aren't there? As we begin, I guess, to lay table stakes, this is a panel to talk about kind of the intersection of what the fuck is SRE. So I guess a way to start, since we're definitely touching on a lot of DevX this year, how does that work in a strongly regulated environment where security is paramount? Has anyone experienced that yet? Yeah, Hannah?
This is what I spend all day thinking about at the moment. So I have strong opinions, but I do really think that security without developer experience is doomed to fail or lack adoption. As a security team, in some of my customers are like big banks and governments and things like that, and they're outnumbered by developers significantly. You're talking about small centralized security teams with tens of thousands of developers sometimes. And you can't do that manually. You have to do that within the tool chain. And I think building tools and processes that are obstacles and friction points for developers are doomed to fail. And so it's all about developer experience. If you're going to adopt highly automated security processes across very, very large populations, which a lot of these regulated places are.
Yeah, I'd agree completely. I think making the right thing the easy thing is the only way forward. You've got to work on the tooling. I think we do in highly regulated industries have a challenge of translation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think shift left and trying to get as much into the tool chain, as you say, is really important. But sometimes you're dealing with a regulator who still expects there to be a change approval board and, 2 changes a year. So I think there's some translation of modern practices that we need to do to make those regulators understand.
We've talked a lot about technical bottlenecks, but we forget there are very human and regulatory and policy bottlenecks. Not that that's bad. Yeah. The Linux Foundation, and I believe your company was part of this too, did a survey last year that said that 3% of developers thought that they should be responsible for security. So there's that. I don't know if that represents the developers in the room, no shame, but that is important. Abby Bangser, who I assume is out there, but I keep quoting her as giving my favorite definition of platform engineering, which is that it deals with the not unimportant, but non-differential work that engineers are dealing with or trying to not deal with. And I think security is a really good point of that. What are your definitions of platform engineering? Liz, do you want to start?
Yeah, I actually hosted a track on platform engineering at the State of Open conference earlier this year. And that was pretty interesting because you get all these different perspectives on, does this mean the infrastructure? How much of this is about the developer experience? How much of this is about the consistency of tooling that you're offering to developers, whether that's around how they're deploying their code, how they're securing their code, how they're connecting their code, how they're documenting their code. I remember being a little bit blown away when I realized that one of the big things that Backstage is offering as a kind of developer experience platform is a way for people to consistently document their services. And that's a really great point. That is something that people need to be encouraged to do in a consistent way in a large organization.
Meri, how do you define platform engineering?
So I'm in the midst right now. I relatively recently joined Pleo, and I'm bringing together a platform organization, and that will include, for us, our payments infrastructure and our all of our operations with the banks and MasterCard and things like that, our infrastructure and reliability, developer experience, quality engineering, and actually product ops and design ops as well. And so that organization also includes IT, security, and data. And the main difference, I suppose, from how they've operated before as individual teams is that they're now treating the platform we offer to the company as a product in itself and using product management techniques to make sure we understand our users and make sure that we're delivering what's needed for our kind of code producing teams to be able to just focus on their customers. And so trying to abstract away a lot of the stuff that people should care about, but often don't care about because they're focused on their customers' needs.
You don't have time or headspace. Everyone's seen the CNCF landscape. I don't think it can be really called a landscape anymore because it's certainly not fitting on a piece of paper, on an A4 piece of paper. No one could understand that.
Jigsaw, though.
But it would be changing all the time, so no one could build it. It would never end. Anna, what is your definition of platform engineering?
I was just thinking this. I don't have a fantastic one because words are hard. But platform's a really overly used term, and I think in this community we tend to talk about platforms as in cloud native platforms. We tend to talk about developer platforms, and I think it's a really good shorthand for us communicating with each other about our intent to build these platforms on these new and emerging technologies. But I think in the organizations that you're in, it can be many things. And I think it's about providing that right abstraction layer for your teams to be productive. And that's not necessarily only development teams. But I think when we talk about platform in the broad sense, it's about what are the services that we provide that don't necessarily ever see our end users. What are our internal services?
Absolutely. And doesn't even need to be an abstraction layer. It could be, if we're following the team topologies, start with the thinnest viable platform you can have, which could be starting with documentation, which, let's be honest, at least in the API space, every single survey, year after year, their biggest complaint is they don't have enough documentation. So if developers are your customers and likely accessing your platform via APIs, what is the platform team probably procrastinating on, like all developers tend to procrastinate on? That may be the most valuable documentation. So you mentioned a community, and we are a community, but we kind of have this, as Jamie's keynote said, kind of lingering extra member. Person, not person, no. AI. So how do you think, what do we want to call it? Thank you very much, dear. What do we want to call that thing, that AI? And how is it going to change the way SREs work?
Dave.
Yeah.
Or as in, I can't do that for you, Dave.
Sister Mac.
Wrong space movie for this date.
So how do we think it's going to change AI?
So I'm from an AI background, which means that I've every 4 years had somebody proclaim that we finally have true AI, and everybody else in the AI academia go, no, we fucking don't. So I think we're at a really interesting point. I think a lot of people don't understand what things like GPT are actually doing, which is interesting. It's not synthesizing information for you, it's making something that sounds like the thing you asked for, whether it's true or not, which I think is interesting. I think the positive side is we'll see a lot of assistance from AI, like Start of 10, things like Copilot from GitHub are very interesting. Do I think that we'll replace all of our SecOps teams with AI? Fuck no. I think there's going to be more need for human judgment, not less.
Are you worried that some companies are going to try to replace their DevSecOps teams with
Yeah.
AI? And
Capitalism will always seek to replace people with something it doesn't have to pay for, right? So I think there will be places that try, and I think we'll learn where some of the edges are by watching the failures over the coming years.
as long as it's kept public.
Show of hands, how many people here have like typed into ChatGPT, write me, an exploit that will find a vulnerability in, some service. There we go. See, somebody has done it. That's yeah.
It does make me think that it's going to be used for whistleblowers are going to start feed information because it's not traceable. There's no data provenance, or it's going to be used to give really bad advice to lesser technologically able people to do really bad things.
I don't know how we would know whether whistleblowing things were true or not true, because that
Exactly.
seems the biggest problem with a lot of this, AI generated content, is how much of it is correct, how much of it is accurate.
How much of it's trained on the internet, which is really a cesspool,
Yeah.
the farm. And by the way, to the audience, you're welcome to ask questions as well. If you raise your hand, we will have a fabulous, Carla. I mean, how amazing are our volunteers, by the way? And our staff and organizers. The Container Solutions team has been working really hard on this, so it's great. So if you raise your hand, I know Carla will run to you, but you can also walk. You don't need to run. We just had in this track, we had one of your colleagues, Liz, Anna, give, a lot of knowledge, dropping a lot of knowledge and information about eBPF. Do you think that's going to change the SRE role, and how do you think so? And for those that didn't attend, maybe in like a 30 seconds or less, what is eBPF?
Yeah, eBPF is a way of running custom programs in the kernel, which means we can change the way that the kernel behaves. And because the kernel, everything that we write, any application code that we write, uses the kernel all the time. So the kernel is involved in everything interesting that your systems are doing. And that makes eBPF a really interesting technology for instrumenting programs, adding observability, adding security tooling, networking, which is what we use it for in Cilium, security, which I've mentioned, but you can use it to create runtime security tooling, which I think is extremely interesting frontier of security that's not super well explored. So eBPF is I don't think it's going to necessarily change the role, but I think it's going to provide a whole new generation, and is already providing a whole new generation of really powerful tools that will help people understand where their systems are going wrong and protect them from exploits and, answer a lot more questions that we currently struggle to answer.
In the world of security, there are about 3.5 million, last I checked, empty cybersecurity roles. I mean, that was a good headline. That did well, that article. Why do you think there is this gap, and how can we close that gap in recruiting the next generation?
I remember seeing a job advertised for a role in, I can't remember which UK government department, but it was something like head of security, and they were only offering
50K.
50K, wasn't it? Yeah. And I thought, well, that's one reason,
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I kind of think about that security as, you're doing a good job when nothing happens. It's sort of like the absence of bad shit going down, like when you're doing a good job in security. And I think maybe like that feedback loop of like the reward system that we all crave, like psychologically as humans, makes security work like quite challenging from that respect. You're doing a good job if nothing happens.
I actually think the same way about, but even about like platform engineering teams. If you have, I call them silent success people. Silent success people are great. They're like they are happy that nothing went to shit today. Noisy success people require there to be like accolades and clapping and applause and whatever else. And so if you put a bunch of noisy success people into your platform engineering team, they're like those firefighters who become arsonists because they're addicted to the adrenaline. Like they will not do the fire prevention work. They will just like diving save the day every time something goes wrong. And I think that it's very true. I think in security and in a number of these roles, we're not great at rewarding the work and celebrating the days that nothing goes wrong. We celebrate when we know that there was an attack and we prevented it, but we don't celebrate all the days that the attack never happened because the preventative work had happened already. And I think we are like not great at that as an industry.
So that's an important way to retain those that we have because they can get paid elsewhere more, certainly more than the UK government's going to give them. Wow. But how do we fill those other 3.5 million gaps? How are we going to recruit new cybersecurity people, make them care about the topic?
I think the biggest problem we have is that there's a whole bunch of people coming into those roles from more of an IT background rather than a development background. And there's such limitations on what you can achieve if you can't code. And so I think the more interesting thing is how do you open up the world of security to engineers who are already interested in and capable of coding? How do you get them to specialize in that area? I think is a easier thing to achieve than to take people who are not yet trained in coding in any way and trying to get them to become detailed security professionals. They often end up on the policy side of things or that kind of stuff when you just try and do a direct into cyber drive.
I've seen a section of, let's say, the security industry, which is very checklist driven. And this is particularly true for sort of regulatory requirements. And people who are not that bothered whether something is actually secure, what they care about is whether they can just tick the tick boxes. And I think that's not very appealing to the kind of developer, people who actually want to explore things and try to break things with code or try to prevent things from being broken with code. That kind of hacker mentality, there's tons of really, really interesting security things that can be done there. But that doesn't necessarily always translate very well to this kind of checkbox mentality. And I would much rather see the security industry focus less on I just could tick the box and understand whether what they've done is really effective. Because quite often those two things are not the same.
Also because the most viability for AI is that checkbox ticking, not the creative thinking around it. And also I think another one that's come up is Gen Z cares about wanting to make a difference. And we as an industry aren't really making that message well, that you are saving lives, you're saving retirement, you're saving people's spot to get their operation, things like that, by protecting the most vulnerable in cybersecurity. It has value. We have an audience question, please.
Thank you. I have two questions for the panelists. One is, I work for a company where it's a fairly decent sized company, but the tech team is just 2 people. Ooh. And, like when I was looking at, witnessing the advice given for developer experience, I was thinking about what to do about non-tech people that work in your company, where you have to encourage basic best practices like use a password manager, update your system, have a password that is other than 1234 on your laptop, things like that. So when your target audience is a group of developers, it seems very easy, right? When you tell them to use a password manager, you can communicate to them the merits of it. But how do you do this to non-tech savvy people while not being authoritative and mandating things and incentivizing? That's one question. Okay, I'll wait for that.
Yeah, let's do that one first.
So, I mean, I think the same principle we talked about earlier of like make the right thing the easy thing still applies. I know we like to think that you could take a group of 100 devs and tell them to use Password Manager and they just immediately comply, but my experience says otherwise. So I think sometimes it's easier with less technical people to tell them something is scary and they will believe you, and then they will do the thing to avoid the scary thing. So mostly it's about focusing on the impact and the risk that they might experience if things go wrong. And things like password managers, I think, you can show that is an easier way as well as the right way. But a lot of it's about picking your battles and choosing the smallest or the most highest impact for least effort first, and going after it that way. I think using the same kind of techniques we do in product management of understanding our users and understanding our customers is useful in that regard. I don't know what you folks think.
Yeah, I've got to say, an example from one of my friends outside of the tech industry. She's a geologist, and one of her employees got hacked, and the hackers encrypted their database, and their database is incredibly valuable to them. It's the result of years and years and years of field work, and they had really no option but to pay the ransom, because that data was fundamental to their business. They had no business if they lost this database. And I think, you talk about password managers, but then there's this, if someone gains access to a certain system, what's the worst case scenario here? And quite often in non-tech companies who can be quite naive about the worst case scenario because it is a killer, or it can be. And so yeah, they learned a hard lesson and they lost a lot of money. But yeah, I think thinking that through and communicating in a way of that is the gravity of what we're trying to do is important. And then I think the other kind of areas where you can get quick wins are just within like establishing the culture around those things, and onboarding is really helpful for that. I've never been through so much security training as I've done at Sneak, but that's because of the nature of the company it is. But it was very much like, this is important here. This is how we do things here, and that's how you will do things here. And I think maybe there's some opportunities around onboarding just to level set with everybody who joins, about the practices that make sense and what's expected of you if you're going to join that company.
Why not have someone that is in a non-technical role get special training in security awareness, because they can become the security advocate within the company and is in that non-technical side? Maybe. What was your other question? Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. So to answer your rhetorical question, I think, is that most people are, so that the security industry has a lot of people who are adequately paranoid. I think other people find it a little distasteful to get into that mindset. My other question is regarding professional development, if I may call it that. So most of the time, an SRE's work, when the SRE does their work really well, they are invisible. And like one of the panelists said, when shit hits the fan, they are the ones who are held accountable. But at the same time, when it comes to advertising internally their accomplishments, is very difficult, because in the absence of any security incidents, it will just seem like they are finding new and novel ways to spend company money. So how does an SRE progress in their career? How do they advertise the virtues of their work, or merits or advantages of what they are doing to people in the higher echelons who don't understand this very well? I mean, is there a common vocabulary that we can use?
I think there's been a pretty common vocabulary in the last few years just through some very high-profile exploits. And, I think everyone can think about things like, that time when the NHS was virtually ground to a halt because they hadn't upgraded from Windows 95 or something, and
She's not joking.
I'm not joking. It was pretty much exactly that. And it was about 2005 at the time, wasn't it? And, you know, the Log4j shell thing, or, you know, any number of high profile solar winds, for example, there's any number of really high profile exploits and situations. Everybody knows that ransomware is a thing. You know, how you turn that into, and in practice, you really, really don't want to click on the links kind of behavior is, you know, a different question. But I think I would be surprised if the senior management in any company is not aware that cybersecurity is a thing, you know?
Why there's so many.
Yeah, I think quite often, you know, the folks who aren't familiar with the domain just have this sort of like niggling fear, like, I know we need to be good at this, and I don't know how to figure out if we're good at this, and I don't know where my risk is. And I think actually in those scenarios, you can help them understand the basics of it. You can help identify opportunities for improvement. But yeah, I can imagine that if you don't work in tech, and you would have a real fear around, like, are we doing enough, or are we doing the right things, or I know we haven't invested in this, and it's only a matter of time before I'm going to regret this decision. You know.
Yeah, I think the two more kind of business topics to tag into are risk management, if your business is one that takes that seriously, which like banks and regulated businesses tend to. But failing that, business continuity planning or business continuity management. So I'll run Dr. Pepper sessions with people, like what's the worst that could happen sessions, where we literally just go, imagine the office is unavailable for 6 months. What breaks? Let's imagine that our internet goes down. What breaks? Literally had somebody suggest when I was doing this at Monzo that what if all of the exec team get kidnapped? What breaks? Like, should we do a test of that? Should we drive? Somebody legit suggested we should put all of the exec in the back of a van and just drive them around without our phones in London for a while to see what daily processes were screwed without one of us around. I think they mostly just wanted to torture us, but
Probably
it
be
was
more
fair enough.
productive, but
And so I think that business continuity is the universal business language that is already spoken, and that's the thing to tag into and to say, this is a type of risk that you should be thinking about alongside your other business continuity things. Like, you have a plan for if you need to evacuate in case of fire, you should also have a plan in case you have a ransomware attack, or there's a major exploit, or what's our way of knowing how we'll respond when the next major thing goes wrong. And I think building those kind of incident response muscles is very useful, beyond just technical incident response, but to make it more of how you operate against all incidents.
are there any governments requiring that now? Because the cybersecurity continuity plan just seems logical, that just like they'd mandate that you have routes to evacuate in fire.
Yes, they do.
That sounds important, but I wonder how many companies are complying now. I would just add that, to go full circle with the themes of the event, this is one of the benefits of having a platform. One of the best things a platform can do is create a single pane of glass and a common language with business. So the platform stakeholders, part of the problem that kept platform adoption poor before was because platform engineers were like, I'm an engineer, I know what these engineers need, and they just did it. But it's not just about bringing your customers, your internal developers into the design. It's about bringing these stakeholders in, making sure business understands. Also, I can't stress, we're in a time of cuts. You want to make sure you can justify all of your work to business, so it can't hurt. And then I would just suggest being you're at a community right now. Take advantage of your community more. If you feel comfortable, apply to next year's talks for What the Fuck is SRE Season 4. Write about it, be more public about things you're working on, internally and externally, be more eager to educate more people. The more you're visible within a company and your work becomes more visible. Really quickly, just real around the room, what do you hope for SREs this coming year?
Oh, what do I hope?
What do you hope?
What
for?
I hope-
What do you hope for this
What I hope
audience?
for,
our community?
I want to see it. I want to see an end to all of these layoffs. That's what I see. Yeah, back to the days where there were more jobs than people. But no, I think we've touched on it with AI, but I think making everyone's jobs easier to do to a higher standard, I think will unleash a lot of creative potential and reduce a lot of toil. And so that's what I hope for.
Okay, Mary.
I'd like to see folks get happier, whether that's through reducing toil or being better recognized. I'm at my company doing a bunch of stuff to explain the kind of silent heroes thing, and to where a lot of the time the platform or the SRE team will say what they've done from a technical perspective, helping them to re-articulate that as, now this thing can't go wrong, or now this business impact won't happen anymore, or would be caught very quickly if it did happen. And so I think that's that kind of recognition by being more understandable is what I would hope for.
Okay, Liz.
Hard to follow. Everybody being happier and having a secure job. Those seem like two pretty solid wishes. I guess maybe also that we have the tooling that enables people to answer questions about the state of their systems really easily. And I think coming back to something you said earlier on about making it easy to do the right thing and easy to get the right information, removing friction from all our tooling.
And I hope we all have a community continuity plan. So this isn't just a day you come, and that it's not hybrid because that doesn't work, but virtual and in person. That everyone gets access to these conversations and we can continue them sooner. Okay. Have a great day, y'all. And come stay here or take a quick comfort break while we set up for the quiz. Thank you very much, Mary, Liz, and